welcome to another episode of Databytes Enabling AI, the series where we break down how artificial intelligence and data is reshaping industries, empowering people, and redefining what it means to work, learn, and lead in a digital world. Today, we are exploring a topic that's top of mind for every leader, every team, and every professional navigating in a rapidly evolving landscape: the rise of AI-fluent workforce and the AI skills that matter most. To help us decode this transformation journey, we are very thrilled to be joined by Krish Swamy, Chief Data and Analytics Officer at Citizens Bank. Krish leads the enterprise data strategy, advanced analytics, and adoption of AI across the organization. We are also joined with Anand Solanki, who is the CFO and Head of Product Strategy and Analytics at Citadel Credit Union, where he stewards enterprise-wide strategy, financial management, product development, and data intelligence. We really appreciate both your presence. I'm going to give everybody an actual detailed introduction because that'll be very pertinent to the rest of the conversation. We'll start with Krish. So Krish is a seasoned expert, and I've seen him in action at Capital One in applying machine learning, big data, and advanced analytics to real-world challenges with deep experience across financial services. And he's worked from fraud prevention, market strategy, and pricing and digital analytics across the board. In his current role, his key role in influencing organizational change. Actually, the discussion we had was on building analytics-driven culture, which is really important in building the teams of the future and the topic that we have at hand, and in leading high-performing teams of analysts, statisticians, and data scientists. With a background that spans across the banking world, he's worked at Capital One Bank, Wells Fargo, and now at Citizens Bank. And he's worked in digital customer experience management consulting. Krish brings a very unique perspective on how AI is reshaping the future of work, and more importantly, how professionals should reskill themselves or skill themselves to thrive in this new era as we are charting a new sort of territory. Anand has had a similar looking career across banking. He's worked for Capital One Bank and Discover, and then for Citadel Credit Union. He brings a deep expertise in capital markets, risk management, credit strategy, and financial analytics. As he's become a part of the executive team at Citadel, he has been at the center of launching some very interesting products that span across the banking, across sort of the banking relationship for a credit union member. And it has been an industry-leading product, which required blending the financial discipline with some very interesting product innovation. And we'll learn a lot about how he's been able to do that through our discussion. So today we'll unpack what it truly means to be AI fluent and how AI is transforming job roles, decision-making, and how individuals and organizations can prepare for a future where human expertise and AI capabilities work hand in hand. All right, so let's dive in. I'll start with my first question. You both worked across analytics, machine learning, and digital transformation in financial services. Let's just start with the basic question, right? From your vantage point, how is AI reshaping the modern workforce? And I'll start with Krish. What are your thoughts, Krish?
See, I think AI or GenAI particularly, AI has been around obviously for really long. But I think in the past, AI was largely the domain of people who were experts. Okay, so you needed to have an advanced degree in statistics or math or data science or computer science to be considered an AI practitioner. I think one thing that has happened is that paradigm has completely changed. It is now in within the reach of anybody to become proficient with AI and use AI in their day-to-day work. So absolutely, I think there is. I think it's in everybody's interest to become skilled with AI. It's made a lot of domains which might have been kind of difficult to understand with an easy access of a lot of people. So just the other day, I knew very little. I discovered that I knew very little about a specific technical area. I think it was about how access management works or secrets management works in the cybersecurity space. I asked a few questions to some of the common AI tools like ChatGPT and Perplexity and so on. And I was able to get some really good responses, which at least gave me a decent appreciation of the space. So point being, I think for people who are interested in learning, I think it gives a great opportunity for that learning to happen in a interactive, relatively kind of painless kind of way. But I think it also puts a lot of, I would say, expectations that you need to ask the right questions, right? It's not going to do your job for you. The quality of how AI is going to help you, or GenAI is going to help you, is a direct function of the effort that you put into it in terms of asking pointed questions, in terms of starting with a hypothesis on what you're trying to solve. And so I think, in a sense, it is going to elevate the role of the generalist. But the generalist has to be somebody who is like really good at problem solving, really good at strategic thinking, and then AI can be of use. If you don't put in that effort, I've seen that it can be a little bit challenging. So those are my thoughts. I think it's certainly see it as a positive force for being able to do a lot of things. A lot of its answers are good. Some of the answers can be a little bit misleading, and so to get into more deeper technical areas, you need to have that subject matter knowledge to be able to know what's reliable and what's not. And then you got to ask good questions, okay? And you got to think deeply about problems, and you got to have done that deep thinking upfront. And then AI can be of assistance.
So it's essentially putting the thinking first, which we anyways did, but it's allowing you to efficiently learn a lot faster than before. And of course, you brought out a lot of important aspects of setting up the problem statement, getting the right answers, and not just relying on it 100%, right? Because there is hallucination, there is answers that may be incorrect. So you got to, you can't stop thinking, which I see a lot in the recent workforce, where folks just take it as a Bible, if you may, right? Whatever answer it gets. And that's the trouble that we get into.
And it is easy to be misled because, it gives answers in such a polished format. You look at that packaging and you're like, oh, okay, it must be the right answer. Whereas, it will definitely be the right answer in a lot of areas, but in some narrow technical area, it might absolutely be the wrong answer. But, it's presented in such a polished manner that you can't tell the difference between one and the other. So,
yeah, it's never wrong. It will never tell you that it does not know the answer. And that's the risk. If I build upon that, the way I look at it is, and I was having this conversation with my high school student son last night about if he was looking to make a business case for something outside of school, and in the past he would have had to start from zero. So this enables any of these foundational models will enable them to start from one. I guess there's no longer the need to start from a blank piece of paper, which takes away some effort and time. So that's the savings. So I look at the impacts of using GenAI, particularly just these GenAI foundational models that we're talking about. Like, I agree with Krish that there's traditional AI and machine learning that we've used, and they have been used, and we've used them at the workforce, but they're very specialized. But from a generalist standpoint, I look at it from a two standpoints. One is, I'll call it efficiency, and the other is intelligence. There's so many examples on both sides, and both are evolving rather rapidly. The efficiency examples, they are so widespread, and like Krish said, it is ubiquitous almost. Anybody and everybody. Like the simplest examples are for me saying every morning to Copilot, summarize my emails and set up appointments. So like the pseudo assistant jobs, that's evolving, and the quality of those outcomes are improving. But that's a very simplistic use case. There's some real workforce efficiency use cases that we also have seen, or productivity or efficiency, whichever way you call it, in the sense that, for example, we are a full service financial institution. So when our workforce is responding to members' calls, or responding to members' video, or even live in person, we have this conversational AI where the first line of defense, the first interaction is with an AI agent. And once they are, I guess, 80% of our calls are answered and completed through that. But then in assisting those that are actually responded by live agents, we're working on having them see live sentiment analysis and also live nudges. So some of those things are helping with making these outcomes directly facing customers and members better. There are also so many examples within HR and learning and development where the cycle times for anything is now cut into a third or a fourth, just because of how swiftly some content can be created. Similar to what I was saying earlier, the 0 to 1 timeline is now much faster in terms of content creation. And then on the intelligence side, that's a whole different ballgame. We've got, and by intelligence, I mean things that would otherwise not have been done, even if you threw n number of staffing. It's just something that is so much faster and responsive. So the good example there has been fraud. Live, n number of transactions per second, all of those can be decisioned now faster than they were. So those are the two categories I like to put how workforce is benefiting from use of these current GenAI tools.
Those are excellent examples, Anand and Krish, and both of you have sort of taken it in a way that makes it, yes, AI is important. Yes, there are good examples and efficiency on how we can deploy it. The one thing that I want to double click on, and it's a challenge. Anand, you brought up everything looks accurate, right? And the keyword here is it looks accurate. How do you then sort of figure out what parts of it, or what are you observing, what are you enabling in your organizations on a workforce level to help individuals decipher or construct a mechanism for them to understand, not to take everything at face value, and sort of what is the extra bit of effort that they need to put in? Because my concern is not that 90% of the time it's accurate, but if even 1% of the time it is, the information is inaccurate, what is the risk you are taking on as an organization or as an individual team member who's making a decision? And how do you sort of work around that?
So let me take a first crack at that, Rahul. So, see, I think the answer differs, at least the way we are approaching it. The answer differs on whether it is a production use case or whether it's something that you're doing for your day-to-day understanding. So let me give a few examples. So production use cases, we use AI today within our contact centers for agents to get answers to questions that might be, somewhat narrow, somewhat esoteric. Okay, so common questions, I'm sure the agents would have answers to, but for some of the more esoteric questions, they have to reference this 3,000 document large library of content. And so we put a retrieval augmented generation interface on top of that to be able to get to those answers quicker. In those cases, we run a rigorous monitoring process where we have a set of standard questions that we have some standard expected answers. And those answers and those questions could span like common questions as well as the ones that are slightly more esoteric. And then we have a gold standard against which to compare. And then we run regular monitoring to be able to make sure that those things are accurate. You got to continue doing that. That's kind of standard monitoring that you do for everything. The second example that I want to give is, for example, if you asked ChatGPT or Copilot or whatever to write you some SQL code, okay, or write you some Python code to be able to do a certain set of things. Without context, that Python code could be, I wouldn't say, I don't know whether I would call it outright wrong, but it may not be appropriate. Okay, for example, if you asked it to do some data analysis and write some code for doing data analysis, it will typically pick pandas as the library to be able to do that. Now, pandas works really well with data sets of a certain size and does not work with data sets beyond a certain size. Okay, so as a practitioner, you need to be aware that the answer that you get is conditional to the data being of a certain size, or you need to ask that question in a more pointed manner. Okay, so I think that kind of points to a little bit more of like user education, saying, okay, the users need to know, what are the places where it could go wrong. And then, going back to Anand's example of, summarize my emails for the day or summarize my meetings, there are some things that just gets outright wrong. Okay, so as a responsible user of the tool, if you're sending out a meeting summary, I would say just look at it once, just make sure that it hasn't gotten something outright wrong. And it won't get it wrong that often, but sometimes it does get it wrong. So I think we've got to, realize somewhere that we can't live our lives in autopilot and basically expect that it's going to do all of the heavy lifting without any effort on our end. So, those are just some examples of like, if you're doing it in a production use case, this is how you think about it. If you're doing it for day-to-day use, this is how you think about accuracy. Anand, what are your thoughts?
Oh yeah, that 100%. That just because it gives you a false sense of accuracy and smartness doesn't mean that you now become dumb as a human. And if the one thing that I always like to use as an analogy is that if a team member has bad aim on a single shooter, now this is not, it could be a sensitive topic, but if you hand them an automatic weapon, they're going to be that much worse. And the thing that we've seen repeatedly again and again in the workforce is that as we hand out tools that are increasing turnaround time, cycle times, or shortening cycle times, we have seen, say for example, if there is a 2x improvement in cycle time, there is a proportionate need for increasing training. So Rahul, the question you asked earlier was, how do you manage using these tools? These are super, instead of driving on the road now, if you're driving an F1 car on the track, same way as that driver is a whole lot more skilled than an average driver, I would draw the same analogy that there's an increased need for training because you don't have the same time. as on the average, as things get faster and faster, the expectation is going to be that everybody also maintains the same level of outcome accuracy and controls. So that means we will have to increase our ability to trap any errors that Krish was talking about. That cannot happen without step one, in my mind, is increasing training for our staff that is using these tools. The second is governance. That I think that's where you were headed. That things that, both Krish and I, we both work in a regulated industry, and there are certain use cases that we just cannot use. So in our case, at least, underwriting, if we cannot explain, and we cannot comply with fair lending, we just choose to not apply AI-based underwriting. And so the things that are highly regulated that might be, and I think this is what Krish was saying, that where you need not a 99.99% accuracy, but you need 100% accuracy and 100% compliance, that's still, the models still aren't there yet. And I was talking to the head of that, the Anthropic sales financial services head, and they've increased their accuracy and also reduced their hallucination to a fraction of what it used to be, but it's still not zero. And so there are, governance wise, one is to just not use it where it matters for it to be accurate and compliant. And where it can be used, I think the examples Krish was sharing, aside from training, what we are trying to do is to build shared understanding of the limitations. And then where possible, we have also set up the use of these models only within private instances with internal training data only. So the case that Krish was talking about, which is for call center agents to be answering questions, we have that, we call it the knowledge assistant, where they can tip into or ask a question and it'll give a natural language answer, but it is only limited to our internal database. So that's one example of having guardrails. The other thing that's harder right now, aside from having training, and by the way, we've sent a lot more people on prompt engineering training courses than ever, because just like Krish was saying, you have to give them, this is a simple tool that we all need to be able to use so that we narrow in and hone into the right answers that we want. But the hard part that I was mentioning is that to have policies and procedures for what one can and cannot do, but that's like rewriting everything, because if traditional methods created traditional policies and procedures, now the same folks who are using these tools are the ones we would have to rely on to self-govern, or even have a whole another effort to say we would have to almost rewrite. The more proliferation we see of these tools, the more proliferation of policy rewrites and controlled rewrite we're going to have.
So, I mean, you're bringing up such an important part, right? And I know, Krish, you might have a point of view, but you both brought up two important parts. One is the fluency and training. That's in my mind, when I think about it, it's an investment that is a new investment line item for organizations, which is a little bit unplanned, that you have to train not only the typical data science AI workforce, but now a lot larger workforce, right? So, and the training, like you said, I mean, you are now training individuals who are not even close to an F1 to start running with an F1. But I think the other important part, Krish, you brought up, and Anand, you touched upon, is governance. But I think it's more not just governance and do's and don'ts. I think, Krish, you said monitoring. That's a big line item. That's a new line item in any organization, a new sort of practice that almost needs to be thought about, invested in. And I haven't heard enough individuals talk about that, right? So as a practice, it's, yes, you do risk model monitoring and governance, and those were okay. But at scale, monitoring your AI models is, I think, something that is very important and not as much talked about.
Yeah. See, I think in general, right, things like monitoring and governance are considered in some ways overhead. Okay, and even within banking, the thing that you'll hear is, oh, we have to do it because we are regulated. And I would kind of strongly debate that, and I'd say you have to do it because it's the right thing to do, right? You've got to look at some of the outcomes. One of the other measures that we use is consistency. When you ask the same question, or you ask the same question phrased in a slightly different way, do you get the same answer, or do you get wildly different answers? Okay, and those are the types of things which, to the point Anand was making earlier, the models have gotten significantly better. If you look at how they perform today versus how it performed a year and a half ago, I think it's night and day. I think they are way better. Having said that, I think you got to pay attention to it now. There are ways in which even that monitoring process itself can be made semi-automated. But ultimately, there's got to be a human in the loop. There's got to be an accountability, saying, somebody's looking at it, somebody's verifying that's the case. It's a little bit like the autopilot in a plane, right? Autopilot has been around for 40, 50 years now. It's not a new idea. But there are certain critical things when the sensors go beyond a certain range, or there are unreliable readings where the autopilot just switches off and tells the pilot, now you got to drive it. Okay, you got to fly the plane. I think that there's got to be a little bit of that that says, a human expert has to step in at some point when some answers are outside certain ranges.
So I'm going to push you two on this, because this is a very important and interesting topic. Who is responsible for making these monitoring calls? Do you feel at an organizational level, will you be able to even do it? Right? Because that almost means like you need to understand what OpenAI or whatever ChatGPT or whoever it is that the models, LLMs that you're using, building that expertise and building the monitoring on top of it, or where does the responsibility lie? Where does it work?
See, at least the way we've thought about it, what we've said is that responsibility lies at a use case. Okay, because the same model can be used for various different types of use cases. We use OpenAI models, we use it for summarization, we use it for classification, we use it for RAG. So what really matters is how that model is performing in the context of the use case. So that's number one. So you don't really need to know the inner workings of the model. You have to absolutely know how the model is being applied to the specific use case. Okay, so that's one. Second, I think the responsibility of, given the rate at which these use cases are growing, I think it's going to be challenging for one central team to be able to manage all of the monitoring. So I think the expectation is going to be that responsibility will need to be federated. Okay, so that's number two. Number three, when that responsibility gets federated, in a sense, it is going to be no different than every manager and every employee knowing how things can go wrong, and then having an ability to manage it, and then having some monitoring to make sure that people are taking it seriously. Okay, so take something like employee behavior in the workplace. Okay, that is not HR's job to monitor that everybody in the workplace is behaving well, they're not harassing their employees, they're not intimidating them, they're not being hostile, and so on. It's a responsibility of every manager. It is a responsibility of every employee. And then you got the HR organization really as a fallback to be able to say, okay, you know what, if there's a violation, it gets escalated, and the HR organization needs to look into it. That's probably the model that we have to start thinking about, where that responsibility gets federated, people understand how it can go wrong. And if people are not following it, or they are ignoring it either out of a lack of knowledge, or they're ignoring it willfully, there's an escalation path where there is some central authority that says, okay, you know what, you had a use case, it was your job to monitor, you haven't monitored, we're going to shut it down. Okay. And we're going to send you into the penalty box, and you got to spend your time there, and then you might be able to start to use it again. I feel things will probably need to go in that direction.
Yeah, I think the first thing I will say is the core tenet of this conversation is still that humans are accountable and responsible in that RACI framework. So we're not talking about a complete agent or a robot being accountable or responsible. So that's the bottom. If that's the bottom line, then that's the starting and the ending. So for right now, we're using these as tools, and you can use tools, and you have to then know the limitations, and you have to know its capabilities. But at the end of the day, humans are going to continue to be responsible. So if that's the starting point, I would say. But then to have the thing that Krish said, that it's very difficult to have every user understand the inner workings of any of these models that they're using, because even those models are continuously evolving faster than our use cases are. So today something, tomorrow it's evolved, it's changed, and that's the difficulty we're having with one of the use cases we're trying to implement is, every month the foundational model changes. So
the models are getting better. Yeah.
They're getting better. So all of the layers of corrections that you're applying on top, they're sort of having to be taken out. So, and then, that it's such a fast moving thing that sometimes I even say that maybe we just prioritize things that you don't need to do right now. Let the models evolve enough.
Right.
But anyway,
100%. Yep. Good point. Yeah.
So that is, I think that may not even be practical to say, train everybody on the fundamentals. So then the thing that I do like is what Krish said about the outcomes. So we measure ourselves on the outcomes, and if there is a need to have a shared understanding, elevating everybody's understanding, because the very simple, the foundational thing, I can learn from my mistakes and I can learn from somebody else's. I can obviously speed it up by learning from everybody else's mistakes too. So for that, I think I saw a little while ago, Krish runs these quarterly things where you come together and share use cases and what you did and what you learned that was good and what was not good, right? That is what we're trying to implement as well. That then you can just be building shared knowledge quickly about what's good and not good.
I think you are both onto something very, very critical. And I want to shift the gear a little bit, because we talked about sort of how we will monitor the models, how we'll govern, how we will sort of create these guardrails around the use cases, and use that as the benchmark. The core underlying sort of tenet here is you have a team, thousands of people, hundreds of individuals, and they are at different levels of proficiency. And it's like, essentially, it's Latin to some and it's English to some, while you might have English as the core language. And suddenly you have a workforce that essentially, eventually everybody needs to learn this. And some will adapt, some will not adapt, some will resist, and sort of there's a change curve going on. Especially the newer individuals are coming in ready to sort of rock and roll with this. Yep. and take it to the next level. It's the individuals who've been in the role for a long time, that's where the change is the most difficult. And what are some of your examples or instances? What are you facing? Because I'm sure you're facing a range of emotions there.
Yeah. Anand, you want to take a first crack? I've been jumping on the questions first, so why don't you go first and I'll go second.
So Rahul, this question, I'm going to say, is not even just related to AI and GenAI and new tools, right? This is an age-old, who moved my cheese? Who's ready for change? It's a very fundamental question And the only difference maybe is that the pace of change may be faster than the pace of change that we may have seen in the past. But then there is still the same kind of considerations that some people are faster at adapting, some people are not so much. And the same level of churn that you'd have seen will probably apply. But the thing that becomes important as organizations is to then lend ourselves to upskilling at the same pace of change. Because more than likely, if a given process is being done by a given person in a given old fashion, it still works in many cases. But it can be done faster, and it can be done with better control. So you can gain on efficiency and control. So that's the upside of the tool. But then there has to be a way for both upskilling and also to motivate or to convince folks to adapt. And that's when these sharing sessions that I mentioned earlier, that once you start showing somebody that a similar process to theirs, if I'm doing it in half the time, and the more important thing is not just be able to see efficiency and control, but also to see that nobody's losing their jobs. Because the way I see it is, if things are getting more efficiently done, then you're preventing future hiring. You're essentially scaling up with the same resources, even as you grow. So once people see that there's only upside to adaptation, that starts that motivation. The second, then it becomes, some people are naturally driven to train themselves or to learn, and some people are not. So that's when you have to have these the support structure made available, where the same people who are champions of these, champions to adoption, can also become the coaches. And that's what we are envisioning here, that we've in the past used this concept of champions for any new change. Earlier in the intro, you mentioned something about the new product that we launched here at Citadel. We did the same concept, that we created a finite group of users that we call champions, and we trained them first, then they sort of cascaded it further. And maybe that's a model that can work as we manage through this change too.
Yeah, see, the way echo a lot of points, Anand, that you made. See, I think the way we've started to look at that is what I've coined as kind of the 3 E's of change management, okay, which is education, enablement, and then enforcement. Okay, so education is telling your teams that this is important. Here is why it is important. Here is where the industry is going. You got to pay attention to this. Enablement, encouragement is where you give people opportunities to use it. Point them to examples where they would use it. So something that we did, this was not company-wide, but internal to my team, was what I told all of my product leaders is that, guys, I would like for you to start using generative AI in your day-to-day work. It could be for creating user stories. It could be for summarizing the meeting minutes from a stand-up. It could be for building some more sophisticated product feature. But think about those examples and demo those examples. So we have a quarterly demo session within my team where every product area spends 15 minutes and talks about some of the things that they've been working on. And I said, guys, bring it forth in your demos. And when we did that demo, I think in Q3, a lot of teams came forth with, oh, this is how we are using AI in our day-to-day work. Okay, which is great. Okay, so the people who are not using it, take a look at that and say, okay, wait a second, what am I missing here? And then I think the final leg is the enforcement, where, you educate somebody, you encourage them, they come to you with a problem, you tell them, hey, you know what, I think this can be solved easily if you were to look at it using these tools. You give them 2 weeks, you give them 4 weeks, and they don't do anything about it. And then it becomes a different conversation saying, hey, you know what, I pretty much brought you to the water. Okay, now you're refusing to drink the water. Now that is a very different kind of a conversation at that point. So I think that will become important in some cases. Hopefully not for a lot of people, but that's probably where, as leaders, I think we might need to take some tough calls.
I like
very,
the three
very
E's.
interesting. I love the 3 E's, and interesting how both of you have approached this question. If I had asked the workforce question maybe even 4 or 5 years back and asked you both, right, what is the most important thing to sort of, when you talk to your teams, what are you going to talk about, right? And I don't know if education would have made to the top of the list. It might be, I want to figure out what the results are and how to make sure that I'm motivating my team towards those results. But suddenly training, development, education has come to the top.
See, I think it's always been important, and I think the companies that have paid attention to that, I think have done well. Okay, so one of the places which had a pretty big significant change when it came to things like culture was Microsoft. Microsoft pre-Satya Nadella and post-Satya Nadella is a very different type of an organization. And one of the things I remember talking to some of the people who were driving change within Microsoft, and they said one of the things that the CEO there was pushing for was, how do we go from a know-it-all to a learn-it-all culture? Okay, and I thought this is like 2014, 2015. This is 10 years ago. Okay, so this is not like recently or something. And I think that's an important cultural thing to kind of communicate, saying, hey, you know what? Be willing to learn. Have that learning mindset and that openness to learning all the time. And you don't know what you'll come across. So keep that open mind. Try to kind of make yourself better on that front. So yes, Rahul, I completely agree. I think that's becoming super critical now. But I would argue, companies that have valued culture would have probably been paying attention to it all along. So
absolutely, and I hope I'm thinking more and more organizations are embracing this, right? So
yes, absolutely.
From going to the classic measurement methodology of creating these KRAs at the top of the house and then bringing it down to drive results, this is also critical. But I want to actually ask a more pointed question on enforcement, right? So as leaders and as sort of, in very significant roles in your organizations, results matter. And the monitoring of results at an individual level even matter more, right? Are you working with your HR teams to create results and measurement methods around adoption, around education, around enforcement? Like, how are you treating that? Because that's I'm sure is a very important topic to be talked about.
Yeah. See, definitely on the education enablement pieces, right? So when it comes to AI particularly, we've got internal training. So, we have metrics in terms of keeping track of, how many people have taken the trainings, how many people have spent time on it. You can also get some really good metrics, and we've all started to get some metrics around usage. Okay, that says, okay, there are so many users of, Copilot across the company. There's so many people on this team. Some teams have 80% usage, some teams have 40% usage. What's going on? And trying to start to close some of those gaps. So we're starting to do some of those things. I don't think we're at a point where we're going to say, oh, if you're not using it, that's going to be a mark against you in your performance appraisal. Okay, but I feel things are likely trending there. Okay, industry wide. Okay, which is, if in many cases, especially when you start to talk about agentic AI and so on, right? Agentic is all about multiple teams working together, and all of those teams have to be equally bought into the use of some of these tools. If 4 teams are working together, 3 of them choose to use it, and one of them is like, no, I'm going to sit on the sideline. that is going to be the weakest link that is, going to pretty much make sure that you don't get the results that you want. So it's going to become, I think, imperative for everybody to use it. And, I mean, Citizens is not actively doing that at the moment, but I think that's a direction that I think we all are heading towards.
So here's one way of enforcement that we've adopted. If there was an ask for a few headcount within a given operational function that the headcount was supposed to start in the middle of next year, we said we're not going to approve them because within that time we should be able to implement use of agentic or use of other RPAs, and they have to self-fund those tasks.
Yep.
And so that is a way for enforcement. And so now we have to figure out, and this isn't in some other function, this is in one of my functions. So we have to figure out, we are on the hook now. So that's one way of enforcement.
No, those are all good forcing functions. You start to set pretty aggressive deadlines in front of your team that forces the team to take advantage of some of these tools. Okay, so that's another way, saying, okay, this used to take you a month, I need it in a week. Okay, figure it out. Okay, and I can point you to how you can get more efficient at some of these things, but it's your job to actually do it. But I guess, Anand, where I was going was, I don't know whether we are at a point where we actively start to penalize, people, for not using it. No. That's going to be a bridge, but I feel that's going to start to play itself out in some of the things that, Anand was also talking about.
Yeah.
If you're not using it, you're not going to be able to meet your same requirements, without additional headcount. Okay. And so you're going to start falling behind when it comes to, your team's deliverables and stuff. So probably it's going to manifest itself in some of these more indirect ways.
It's essentially a stair-step way, right? You're essentially saying, I'm not going to give you headcount. In the future, maybe next year, it's going to look different.
Yeah.
I have final two questions, right? So it has been very interesting conversation around thinking about AI from a workforce perspective, very pertinent to how we as leaders, need to think and manage. This is going to be a personal question. How are you adopting? What are you doing that is going to be as a model for the team? Because I'm sure that's also a question that the team is going to raise at some point, right?
So let me, and I don't know whether it is a modeling the way kind of a answer, Rahul, but I'll give you an example of something that, in fact, we were just talking about earlier this morning with a couple of my colleagues, right? Which is within banking, right? Banking is complex, different systems. There are core applications. There are other applications that work together within a workflow. There is some alerting that needs to happen within that workflow. There is some monitoring that needs to happen within a workflow. There is some reporting that needs to happen once every month and so on. In the past, to be able to solve something like this, you would need to get a bunch of architects and they would get into a room and, it would take them, a week or several sessions for them to be able to get to an answer. With some of the tools that are out there, you can get the answer to those questions within a matter of minutes. Okay. Now, the point is not being able to get to the answer quicker. I think the point is, how do you get people who are maybe tunneled in their way of thinking about things, and how do you get them to expand their aperture? And by looking at some of these solutions that come out of, some of the AI tools that are out there, you get a bigger picture. Okay. And I guess I'm using that as a way to kind of encourage people to say, hey, you know what? This solution that you're thinking about has got some event processing here. It's got some triggering here. It's got an event-based architecture here. There are some agents here. Use these as tools to kind of understand that full picture. Nobody expects you to be an expert at all of it, but you at least need to know what the connected parts are. Okay, and then you can start going and talking to people around the company who, like, if you're the event-based person, you can then go and talk to the agentic person, or you can talk to the reporting person to see how your solutions can mesh together. Okay, so I guess it can help people just develop a shared vision on how it's supposed to work. And I think that's where leaders kind of not just talking in theory, but putting live examples in front of people saying, hey, you know what, I was able to do this in half an hour. You guys can do so much better, okay, with your knowledge and your expertise. So why don't you get together and collaborate and develop a kind of a shared vision of some of these things? I think that is a good way to motivate people and say, hey, let's look at the bigger picture here.
So forcing these conversations and allowing, which is quite important, right? As everybody's thinking about their local optima versus a global maxima, where you can reimagine some separate processes to come up with something that is, not thinkable. Very important. What are your thoughts, Anand? How are you approaching this personally, professionally?
Personally, by using what I shared earlier, Copilot and Agent, and then the step one is really to openly acknowledge usage. So I think Krish was saying the same thing, that openly, even if I'm saving 10 minutes, I'm very open about it. If I am bringing my starting point answers using these GenAI models, I'm very open to acknowledge. Nobody should be shy, and I would be the first one to say that.
Yeah.
The second step is me using the same thing and twisting it outside. One is using it personally and acknowledging it. The second is every time I ask somebody to do something, and if I sense that it's taking longer than what I think it should based on usage of it, I would openly ask, so which model do you use? How did you accomplish this? Or if you didn't, how can you do it using these models? So that's number two. So far it's personal inward, personal outward, one-on-one. The next step is public, right? So public shaming or public acknowledgement or public appreciation. It works because now you know that it is a shared expectation. This isn't something on the side. This is a movement. The question you asked earlier about how do you manage this change. So it all goes back to that. So it's a journey. But we're on it.
Yeah. Oh, this is fantastic.
And see, I think, I think this also, to Anand, I think a point that you made earlier, in a sense, this is not different from any of the other change things that we all have been part of. It is just that things are moving like 10 times, 20 times faster than what they moved back then. So, if companies have been emphasizing on things like learning, they have to emphasize them even more. If companies have been emphasizing things like adaptability to change, they have to do that even more. So I think it's, the HR organizations also get involved in some of these things, which is, how do they, it's not their job, of course, it's their job to facilitate it, but how do they play a role in terms of making sure that the right culture is set up within the company? So, and it is leaders modeling the way, I think, is a important part of that overall recipe. So
absolutely, very, very important, interesting conversation so far. One final question, and this is very pertinent for all the college-going kids, or getting into college, right? What degrees to get, or what advice do you give for early career professionals in terms of how to get themselves ready in this new environment where, frankly, a computer science coder might have a very different role now than before? Or what is your sense in a couple of years? What's going to happen? What should they be prepared with?
Anand, want to go first? You got high schoolers. I've got high schoolers. So
we have so what a coincidence.
We have high schoolers who are like born 4 days apart. So yeah. So.
we both have the exact thought process going on in our mind right now. It also hits home for me more because my son is exploring computer, or I should say he was exploring computer science as a major, and now he's evolving his thinking even before he embarks on that. But the thing that I take away is it doesn't matter what major anybody is. The impacts are so ubiquitous, and use cases are everywhere. This is almost a revolution, like the Industrial Revolution, where this is going to hit everything, all parts of the world, in fact, not just all parts of businesses, such that the only thing I would say is there aren't that many professions that are remaining that will be untouched. Eventually, even electricians and plumbers are going to be affected. But right now, there is that where I have, coincidentally, I've also seen many young folks who would otherwise have gone into white collar kind of roles. They are choosing to go into more hands-on roles, and they're happy for it. But that's the kind of thing that will also happen in the near term. And what I mean by that is those that are going into traditional functions, even if it is a medicine, dental, finance, economics, all of those professions are getting impacted. And I guess the irony is some schools are keeping up with the changes and some are leading, but others are not. And so in those instances, students or young professionals are the ones who will have to take it into their own hands and be there, because the job market is brutal to those who do not adapt. And I've seen examples of that too. We have a friend, and they were saying even a Harvard recent grad, is finding it difficult to find a job if they do not have these skills. So we have examples of that. Even a biomedical engineer or an aerospace engineer. We have examples that if you didn't have these AI-based or technical skills that are used, then it's difficult. So I don't know if there is a wholesale change in direction that I would recommend anybody, but just embrace continuous change. Like there isn't going to be, just because of the things that Krish was talking about, 10-20x pace of change, there isn't going to be any profession that will stay steady. Because I remember there was an entire generation when if you were a mechanical engineer or a civil engineer, you studied once. You went to college for 4 years and you lived and retired in that single profession. Of course, you learned, but wasn't significant. It was some slow evolution and you were fine. That's gone. So it doesn't matter what function you are going to continuously learn. And I think the good thing is we talk about it as if it's not a good thing, but I would say that what I have seen from young professionals these days, they are very adaptive. I mean, I've seen so many more examples where they move at the same pace. Or I mean, if you think about it, they're the ones driving these changes and improvements, right? So they are with it. So I think we're in it for a good ride.
Yeah. See, I think what I tell my high schooler is that so number one, I think with a lot of these tools, it's going to make it easier for people to do the thinking, and a lot of people are just going to outsource their thinking to these tools. Okay. And when that starts to happen, there's actually going to be a premium on people who do their own thinking. Okay. So be the person who does your own thinking. Okay. And develop that attitude, develop that way of kind of operating through life. Second, as you go from studying, and when you make the transition from studying to working, while you're studying, whether you're in school or in college, the setup, the environment is going to keep telling you AI is a bad thing. because they obviously don't want you to be, doing your homework and all of that using AI. But the moment you start working, the expectations are going to be flipped 180 degrees, and people are going to expect you to start using AI for a lot of things. Okay, so be prepared for that change. Okay, don't ever take a viewpoint saying it's unequivocally a good thing or unequivocally a bad thing. It's, the answer is it's a mix of both. And the third is something I think she herself has learned. She told me once that, she doesn't want to be an NPC in life. Okay. And I'm like, and for people who don't know what an NPC is a non-playable character in video games. Okay. So she's like, yeah, my goal in life is not to be an NPC. I'm like, yeah, that's great. That's a great attitude to have. Engage with people around you, connect with them, learn from them, teach, share. Human being connection is still going to be important. Don't be an NPC. So.
Very interesting. I think this was a very, very interesting conversation. We started with sort of how we are enabling AI in the organization, and ended with, I think I take the last sentence, Krish, you said how to not be an NPC and be part of the change and be part of sort of the teams and driving this change. It's and Anand, you pointed out this is bigger than the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution took years to sort of set in. This has set in, and it's already driving change. And I don't think the paradigm is, I'll become an electrical engineer and can retire an electrical engineer. I think everybody here has to go from a know-it-all culture to a learn-it-all culture in some ways. And that's the only way to be now. So I think this is, thank you both for being very, very thoughtful in sharing all the experiences and sort of, how you are changing and driving some of the change in your organizations and how you are thinking about it. Really appreciate it. It's I'm sure it's going to be very useful for a lot of folks listening into this. So thank you so much.
Awesome. All right. Yeah, great connecting, Rahul, and Anand likewise. So
yeah, thrilled to be here. Thanks.